during this process, like, obviously Jack Campbell surprised us all, or Brad Holmes surprised us all by picking Jack Campbell with the 18th overall pick. And the first reaction for a lot of people was like, oh, Lions reached. This guy would have been there in the second. I had a second round grade on him, this, that, and the third. And there was a lot of back and forth. And Brad, to his credit, very much so stuck to his guns and was like, yo, we love this guy. He was the highest guy on our board at the time, and we picked him. And we picked him there because they didn't believe that he was going to be available in the second round. Well, based on what we're seeing from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, like insider video of their draft process, they were down to two guys. And those two guys, ironically enough, are two guys. One of those guys actually is someone that Lions fans, I know a number of us were clamoring for, in that it was Kalijah Kancey. They were hoping that Kalijah Kancey would be there at 19 and that Detroit wouldn't take him. But if we had decided to take Kalijah Kancey, Tampa Bay was fully ready to take Jack Campbell at 19. And this information that we're kind of getting, this inside information, to me kind of solidifies one Brad's stance that, like, hey, this guy was a highly ranked player. This was somebody that we highly sought after, because in that thought process echoed throughout the league. But it also debunks everyone who's kind of saying like, oh no, Jack Campbell will be there in the second round. I I don't think that's possible because clearly Tampa was ready to take him at 19. And if Tampa was ready to take him at 19, I believe there were other rumors that I think it was like the Giants or someone else was looking to take him somewhere in the 20s. So I don't think it really I think it kind of more so tells us like, hey, Jack was highly sought after as a draft prospect, and the Lions swooped in and got him ideally in the best place they possibly could, um, based on again how they valued him. Real quick shout out to people in the chat. Tony Chase saying on deck. One Funky Lions fan. Evening all. What's good with you, One Funky Lions fan? Shout out Jordy Mansion saying just found this channel. Love it so far. Appreciate it, man. I hope that you continue to enjoy it. Um, Let me know if this is your first stream that you attended, if you've just been watching some of the other content that I've been doing. But again, appreciate you allowing me to be a part of your night and hanging out with us and joining in the chat. Casey saying no one knows Jack about draft success for at least a few years after the draft. It's all conjecture. And I think that's very true, right? I think um the way some of us were reacting as far as like this is a reach or this was a bad pick is very like premature, because again, I've kind of said it in some of the chats that I've had with some of you guys, um and some of the other videos as well as on stream, is like we kind of won't be able to judge, Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell until they've actually touched the field and until they've actually put a season under their belt. If these guys go out and if Jack Campbell went out and was defensive rookie of the year, no one's going to say this was a bad pick. Everyone's going to be praising Brad Holmes and this coaching staff and this scouting department on having so much foresight into the type of player he could be, and having the conviction and actually having the balls to go out and take a linebacker when that position isn't highly sought after. If Jahmyr Gibbs goes out here and is in the running for offensive rookie of the year or wins rookie of the year and is shows himself to be every bit of the explosive player we expect him to be, again, no one's going to get upset that he was taken at 12. No one's going to be upset that we took him over Bijan. If he outperforms Bijan for whatever reason, whether it's just out of natural production or God forbid, I'm not wishing anything upon Bijan, but if Bijan ends up, having an injury riddled season because he's more of that workhorse back, no one's going to look at the Gibbs pick and be like, that was a terrible decision. So I agree with Casey in that stance that like, yo, it's going to take a few years. Obviously, I get it. As fans, we want instant gratification. We want to be able to see these guys hit the field and be instant impact players. But if you listen to the way that Brad Holmes talks, if you listen to the way Dan Campbell talks about these guys, that's the expectation. The expectation is that Gibbs and Campbell and Laporta kind of come in and they hit the ground running, that they're these impact players from day one, and they do everything that they possibly can to help this team still achieve the goals that they have in front of them. One Funky Lion fan saying Tampa took Dennis, the linebacker from Pitt, way later. That's true. And I think that also kind of shows, I don't know if you're kind of pointing that out to say that maybe they wouldn't have taken him, but I think it kind of shows just like how drastically the how big the gap was between Jack and some of these other linebackers. Clearly, Jack had a certain skill set that again, like Brad, I think Brad had an interview today on Sirius Radio where he was kind of like saying, and I saw the article from I believe Jeff Risdon had wrote basically kind of saying like, yo, when they were doing their evaluation of Jack, they felt like he was a complete player. He wasn't just like just this old school linebacker. Like they felt like he does, and I kind of broke it down in my comp for him. He has great coverage skills. They thought he was very good against the run. I think I'll disagree a little bit with Brad where he says like, hey, he sheds blocks well. I don't think he does it very well, but I think he has room to grow in that department. When you look at his size and his measurables, he could definitely be way better at it than what he showed at Iowa. Jordy mentioned saying, I think hit rate is not talked about enough. It's like 50%. If you take positional value without having a strict process for who you want, you can take a guy at a high value position who will bust. That's true. Like, so we love to talk about positional value in this sense of like, oh, you have to take, offensive tackles and defensive ends are better value than running backs and linebackers. I know for a fact, I can think of recently, just off the top of my head, defensive ends that were taken in the top 5 that were busts. Like, not like, oh, they had a bad year. Like, no, they never lived up to their draft slot. Cleveland Farrell, drafted by the Las Vegas Raiders, never lived up to the hype. Dion Jordan, a couple like years ago, drafted by the Miami Dolphins, never lived up to the hype. I would even say Jadeveon Clowney to the hype that he had coming out of South Carolina, never really lived up to the hype, is never quite the player that we thought he would be. And but yet he was still a high value position. So I think having that conviction to be able to draft the guys that you think fit is a key thing for Brad. And last week I kind of questioned that. Like, should there be a level of concern that Brad falls in love with guys that a lot of other experts are saying like, hey, these are not high quality players, but Brad feels very strongly about them. Well, I think when we get inside looks into other organizations like we did today with the Bucks, it kind of paints a clearer picture that like, hey, this isn't just the Lions that are saying this. Like it may look like that because they're the ones who made the pick, but other teams feel the same way about some of these players. And some of them were willing and are willing to make that same type of gamble. And I think Tampa's very interesting because Tampa has two very good linebackers already, or at least one. Levante David is very good. Devin White, maybe not so much. So it's like it's kind of interesting that Devin White was a linebacker that they drafted very high in the first round a few years ago. And the fact that they were still considering drafting another middle linebacker, probably to either compete with Devin White or to take Devin White's job, kind of tells us a lot of what they kind of already what they thought of Jack Campbell, and that their thought process was probably very much in line with what the Lions thought. Now, clearly, like they say in the video, Cansey was the guy that they wanted. And if we had taken Cansey, obviously they wouldn't have gotten their top guy. Um, but then you kind of wonder like how much of that is just like conjecture, like they got the guy, so they kind of have to say that now. Um, but it's definitely interesting to me that you get a guy like that, and obviously there's the whole talk of like, well, was it a reach? Was it this? Was it that? And at least when you start to get an inside look at other organizations, it doesn't really look to be like that doesn't really look to be the case. Dat fan man saying all these picks can hit. This is still the anti-positional value draft. Running back, linebacker, tight end, safety. All those guys are already towards the top of pay on each positional list. If they work, it's gravy. If not, yikes. And I think that's the key. But I think what you'll also see if these guys don't hit, I think what we just saw this past offseason where Brad Holmes traded away TJ Hawkinson, or he traded away TJ during the season. He traded away Jeff Okuda during the offseason. Brad's not afraid to move guys. If you're not living up to it, he's not going to get stuck with the bill of having to pay you, that fifth year option or feel like he has to extend you. If you're not playing to the level that they're hoping that you're going to, they will move you and they'll take whatever picks they get. Again, TJ, I think, got moved in division, and all we got was a third round pick, I think, next year. And so it's like, again, like you'll just do whatever you can to get that pick or get something to be able to compensate you for the future.